The heavy mahogany door of the estate's industrial kitchen didn't just close. It clicked shut with a deafening, terrifying finality. Elise froze, the damp dish towel slipping from her trembling hands. She had been sobbing quietly over the cold marble island, entirely convinced she was alone in the sprawling 3-story fortress. But standing there in the shadows was Tristan Ashford. As he stepped into a sliver of moonlight, his cold, piercing silver eyes fell on the dark bruise blooming across her cheek. He did not raise his voice, and he did not ask why she was awake at 3 o'clock in the morning. He only whispered one question, a question that was about to unleash a bloodbath. Who did that to you? If this opening left you desperate to know what happens next, smash that like button and share this story with someone who loves dark romance and dangerous men. Subscribe to our channel and ring the notification bell so you never miss a single thrilling chapter. Elise took a step back, her spine striking the cold, sharp edge of the industrial refrigerator. Her heart thudded against her ribs, as if it meant to break free. She tried to speak, but her voice shattered like glass. I fell. I slipped on the back staircase. It is nothing serious, sir. The lie came out weakly, almost pitifully. Even she could not believe herself. Tristan Ashford did not move. He simply stood there, tall and terrifying, like a statue carved from granite and darkness. His silver-gray eyes moved slowly from the bruise on her cheek to her trembling hands, then returned to her face with the deadly patience of a predator waiting for its prey to surrender itself. You have 10 seconds. His voice was low, stripped of all feeling. Do not make me ask a second time. 10 seconds. Elise counted in her head. Each second dragged by with the weight of a year. She looked into those eyes, the very eyes she had spent the past 8 months trying to avoid, trying to pretend did not exist. And she knew, with the kind of certainty that settled in bone and blood, that lying to this man was the stupidest thing she could possibly do. Her knees gave way. She slid down the side of the refrigerator, collapsed onto the freezing tile floor, and began to cry. Not the sobbing she had done before. This was the crying of someone who had reached the final edge, someone with nothing left to lose. 2 years ago. Her voice was no more than a hoarse whisper. I was a final-year medical student at Columbia. I had dreams, a future, everything a 25-year-old woman could hope for. She lifted her face and looked at Tristan, who still stood motionless like a carved figure. Then my father. My father lost $1.5 million at an underground casino in Atlantic City. He lost money that belonged to the Moran family. The name itself made the air in the kitchen turn thick and heavy. Elise caught something flicker in Tristan's eyes, but it disappeared too quickly for her to understand what it was. They gave my father 2 choices: pay within 1 month or die. But my father had no money. We had nothing at all. My mother died of cancer when I was 15. My father was an alcoholic, a gambler, and my mother's death only made everything worse. She swallowed hard, her throat dry and burning. A man came to see me. He said there was an arrangement, a special job at a mansion on Long Island. High pay. If I worked there and turned over 70% of my wages every week, they would not kill my father. I had to leave school. I had to give up everything. Elise let out a bitter laugh. I was terrified when I realized whose house it was as I stepped through those gates. Tristan Ashford's estate, the sworn enemy of the Moran family. They had planted me here with a clear, deadly mission, and I was their perfect puppet. She raised a hand to the bruise on her cheek and winced at the pain, but I did not spy for them. I only tried to survive. 8 months. See nothing, hear nothing, say nothing. That was the rule, Mrs. Whitmore taught me on my first day. I became a ghost. I did everything I could to make sure no one noticed me. Tears slipped down her cheeks, stinging the wounds there. But tonight I was short $2,000. My father had to be hospitalized because of liver failure. The medical bills devoured the money I had set aside to pay them. Her voice tightened and broke. Ricky Doyle. He was waiting at the back door when I went out to dump the trash. He hit me. He said that if I did not have the money by tomorrow morning, they would cut off my father's fingers one by one. Then they would kill him. Elise finished her story and sat there hollowed out, drained, waiting for rage, waiting for contempt, waiting to be thrown out into the cold rain-soaked night. But nothing came. There was only silence. And Tristan Ashford's silence was more frightening than any fury she had ever witnessed. He had not moved so much as an inch the entire time she spoke. He stood there listening, his eyes never leaving her, as though she were some mysterious painting he was trying to decipher. At last, Tristan spoke. His voice was still cold, but there was a new shade in it, something Elise could not name. "I know who you are, Elise Hartwell." She lifted her head, stunned. You knew?" "I know everyone who steps into this house." Tristan moved closer, stopping directly in front of her. From this angle, he seemed like a tower, his shadow falling over her completely. "I know you are Henry Hartwell's daughter. I know you dropped out in your final year of medical school. I know you came here through an arrangement with the Moran family." He tilted his head, his eyes cutting straight through her. "What I did not know was who dared to lay a hand on what is mine. The words froze Elise where she sat. "Name." Tristan said it as a single word, heavy as a death sentence. "The name of the man who hit you." Elise opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She looked at Tristan, her eyes wide with fear, trying to read the man standing before her, but his face was like a wall of stone, without a crack, without the slightest emotion breaking through. "Ricky Doyle." She whispered the name as though it might bite her. "He is one of the Moran family's enforcers. He collects money and teaches lessons to people who do not pay on time." Tristan said nothing. He simply pulled his phone from his pocket, pressed a single number, and lifted it to his ear. "Conrad, come down to the kitchen, right now." Only 6 words. No explanation. No pause to wait for an answer. He ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket, as if he had just set down a cup of coffee, rather than summoned his right hand at 4 o'clock in the morning. Less than 3 minutes later, the kitchen door opened. A large man walked in, built like a bear, with thick sideburns and the sharp eyes of someone who had seen far too much in this life. Conrad Mercer. Elise had seen him a few times over the past 8 months, always walking beside Tristan like a loyal shadow. He was the kind of man who made people want to keep their distance with a single glance. Conrad swept his eyes across the kitchen, stopping on Elise where she sat on the floor with the bruise on her cheek, then looked at Tristan. Not a single question, not a flicker of surprise. Only the waiting stillness of a man ready to receive an order. "Ricky Doyle." Tristan said it in a voice as cold as ice. "Find him. I want to know where he is within the next 2 hours." Conrad nodded. "Anything else, boss?" "Henry Hartwell, her father." Tristan glanced at Elise. "Find his location, his condition, and whoever is guarding him. Report back within 6 hours." "No." Elise sprang up from the floor, her legs unsteady, but still she rushed toward Tristan. "Please, sir, do not. If the Morans find out you are interfering, they will kill my father. They will think I betrayed them, think I told you everything. Please, I am begging you." She seized the sleeve of Tristan's jacket, and in that instant realized the mistake she had made. No one touched Tristan Ashford. No one. It was the unspoken rule that even the biggest fools in this estate knew. Conrad took 1 step forward, his hand already resting at his waist where a gun was hidden, but Tristan raised a hand, signaling for him to stop. Then he looked down at Elise, looked into her green eyes, bright with tears and desperation, and for the first time in this endless night, something changed in those eyes. Not warmth, not pity, but something deeper, something more dangerous, like a fire smoldering beneath a bed of cold ash. "You are working in my house." Tristan spoke slowly, each word falling like drops of molten lead. "That means you are under my protection, and I never let anyone touch what belongs to me." Elise stood there, frozen, unable to believe what she had just heard. Tristan gently removed her hand from his sleeve, but there was no roughness in the gesture. Then he turned to Conrad. "One more thing. Wake Mrs. Whitmore. Tell her to prepare the east guest room on the 2nd floor. Miss Hartwell will move there tonight." Conrad blinked, which was perhaps the greatest show of surprise he was capable of. But he did not ask questions. He only nodded and left the kitchen, leaving Elise alone with Tristan in the heavy silence. "You do not have to do this," Elise whispered. "I am not worth making an enemy of the Moran family." Tristan did not answer. He only looked at her for a long moment, then walked out of the kitchen, leaving her there with a million questions and not a single answer. 20 minutes later, Mrs. Whitmore appeared at the kitchen door. The stern housekeeper looked tired from being awakened in the middle of the night, but not one word of complaint escaped her thin lips. She merely looked at Elise, looked at the bruise on her cheek, and nodded. "Come with me, Miss Hartwell. Miss Hartwell, not girl, not maid." Miss Hartwell. Elise followed Mrs. Whitmore through the long, endless hallways she had scrubbed hundreds of times over the past 8 months. But tonight, she was not carrying a broom or a bucket of water. Tonight, she was being led to the second floor, the part of the estate reserved for honored guests, the place she had never once been allowed to enter. The room Mrs. Whitmore opened for her was 5 times larger than the cramped box in the basement where she had slept for the past 8 months. There was a large window overlooking the garden, cream-colored velvet drapes, a double bed dressed in sheets as white as clouds, and a crystal chandelier hanging from the high ceiling. "If you need anything, ring the bell," Mrs. Whitmore said, her voice still even, though no longer as cold as before. "Your personal things will be brought up in the morning." Then she turned away and closed the door, leaving Elise alone in the strange room that now belonged to her. Elise walked to the window and looked out at the garden sunk in darkness. The rain had stopped, but mist still covered the ground like a silver blanket. She lifted a hand to the bruise on her cheek, feeling the dull throb that reminded her everything that had just happened was real. Ricky Doyle had struck her. Tristan Ashford had seen it. And now, somehow, she had become someone who belonged to the most feared mafia boss in New York. She climbed into bed and lay on her back, staring up at the impossibly high ceiling. Sleep did not come. Her mind spun with 1,000 questions. Why did he help her? What did he want from her? Had she escaped one trap only to fall into another? A golden cage or a circle of protection? Elise closed her eyes, but the image of those eyes still burned in her mind. Maybe both, she thought. Maybe both. Elise had managed only a few hours of shallow sleep when the knock came at the door. Morning sunlight had already spilled through the curtains, laying bands of gold across the pure white bed sheets. She sat upright at once, her chest tightened with a frantic rhythm, needing a few seconds to remember where she was. The elegant guest room. The second floor. Not the cramped little box in the basement. Miss Hartwell. Mrs. Whitmore's voice carried through the door. "The master wants to see you in his study. Right now." Elise hurriedly ran a brush through her tangled hair and put back on the wrinkled servant's uniform she was still wearing from the night before. She had no time to think about how she looked. When Tristan Ashford summoned someone, people did not keep him waiting. Mrs. Whitmore led her through the long hallways, up the broad marble staircase, and to the massive oak door at the end of the west corridor. The housekeeper knocked twice, short and crisp, then opened the door and stepped aside, signaling for Elise to go in. Tristan Ashford's study was very much like the man himself, full of power and utterly without mercy. Dark oak covered everything from floor to ceiling. Towering bookshelves were lined with leather-bound volumes, and an enormous desk stood before a wall of glass overlooking Long Island Sound. The morning light poured in through the windows, yet it did nothing to soften the heavy atmosphere in the room. Tristan sat behind the desk, still dressed in black as though he had never slept. Perhaps he truly had not. Conrad stood nearby, his hands clasped behind his back, his face as expressionless as a statue. "Close the door." Tristan gave the order without lifting his head. Elise obeyed, her heart pounding against her ribs. She stood there in the middle of the vast room, feeling smaller than she ever had in her life. "Report." Tristan spoke to Conrad. Conrad cleared his throat and began reading from the tablet in his hand. Ricky Doyle. Taken care of at 5:30 this morning. His voice was flat, without the slightest trace of emotion, as though he were reading a weather forecast. He will not trouble anyone again. Elise felt the blood drain from her face. Taken care of. She knew what those words meant in this world. She had lived in this estate for 8 months, had heard enough whispered conversations, had seen enough faces disappear and never return. As for Henry Hartwell, Conrad continued, he is being moved to a private treatment facility in northern New York. Security is absolute. No one knows where he is except us. Elise opened her mouth, wanting to ask, wanting to say something. But Conrad had not finished, and regarding the debt, he glanced at Tristan, as though asking permission to go on. Tristan gave the smallest nod. $1.5 million was transferred to Patrick Moran at 6 o'clock this morning. The Hartwell family's debt to the Moran family has been paid in full. Completely. The world stopped. Elise stood there with her mouth slightly open, unable to believe what she had just heard. $1.5 million. The debt she had sacrificed 2 years of her life to repay. The debt she had believed would remain on her shoulders until the day she died. Paid. In a single night. "No," she stammered. her legs trembling so badly she nearly collapsed. "No, that cannot be." "Why?" She looked at Tristan, her eyes wide with shock and confusion. "Why are you doing this? You do not know anything about me. I am only a maid. I scrub floors and wash bed linens. I am not worth $1.5 million. Tristan did not look at her. His silver-gray gaze remained fixed on the window, on the waters of Long Island Sound glittering in the morning sun. His face revealed nothing, like a fortress wall without a single crack. "Your father's debt is now a debt to me." His voice was low and even, leaving no room for objection. "You will remain here, but from this moment on, you take orders only from me, no one else. Not Moran, not anyone." Elise swallowed, her throat dry and burning. "What do you want from me?" The question hung in the air. Conrad stood motionless. Tristan still looked out the window. The silence stretched so long that Elise thought she could hear the beating of her own heart. "I do not know yet." At last, Tristan answered. Those 3 words were, somehow, more frightening than any clear answer could have been. "Conrad will show you out," Tristan continued, his voice returning to its cold, decisive edge. "You may go." Elise wanted to say something, wanted to thank him, to protest, to understand, but she knew she had been dismissed. She lowered her head and turned away, walking out of the room on trembling legs. Conrad followed her into the hallway. When the oak door closed behind them, he placed one hand on her shoulder, making her stop. "Girl," his voice was still deep and rough, but there was something in it now that came close to sympathy. "There is something you need to understand. Patrick Moran has taken the money. Even for a sum like $1.5 million, he would not dare start an open war with the Ashford house right now. The cost of fighting us is far higher than the value of that debt." Conrad paused, his sharp eyes fixed on her. "But he will not forget. Patrick Moran never forgets. He is waiting for his moment. And when that moment comes, he will act." Elise nodded, her throat tight. "I understand. Good." Conrad removed his hand. "Now go back to your room and rest. Someone will bring your breakfast upstairs." He turned and walked away down the corridor with his heavy steps, leaving Elise standing there alone. She remained there for a long moment, staring into the empty space before her, trying to grasp everything that had just happened. Ricky Doyle was dead. Her father was under protection. The debt had been paid. And she, somehow, had become Tristan Ashford's, no longer a puppet of the Moran family, no longer a slave to her father's debt. But that did not mean she was free. She had only changed masters. From Patrick Moran to Tristan Ashford. From hell to... what? Elise did not know. But as she made her way back toward her new room, she realized something strange. For the first time in 2 years, she did not feel afraid. She felt safe, and that, perhaps, was more frightening than anything else. A week passed, and Elise's life changed in ways she never could have imagined. She no longer woke at 5 o'clock in the morning to scrub floors or wash bed linens. There were no more heavy buckets of water, no more hands cracked open by harsh cleaning chemicals. Instead, Mrs. Whitmore assigned her to an entirely different duty, managing the estate's library and the Eastern Garden. The first time she heard it, Elise thought she must have misheard. The Ashford family library was a 2-story room filled with thousands of rare books, a collection any university would have coveted. The Eastern Garden was a masterpiece of landscape design, with fountains, marble paths, and hundreds of rose varieties imported from all over the world. This was not work for a maid. This was work for a senior housekeeper, perhaps even for a member of the family. But no one objected. No one dared. The guards had begun to bow their heads when she passed, large men with guns hidden beneath their suit jackets. Men who had once looked through her as if she were air, now nodded with quiet respect and called her Miss Hartwell. Mrs. Whitmore, the stern woman who had once regarded her as nothing more than a cleaning tool, now spoke to her in a respectful tone and even, on occasion, offered a faint smile. Elise understood. She understood that none of these changes had come because she deserved them. They had come because Tristan Ashford had decided they would, and in this world, his word was law. As for Tristan, she rarely saw him during that week. The master of the estate was like a ghost, appearing and vanishing according to a schedule no one else was allowed to know. Sometimes she saw the line of black cars leaving the gates at midnight. Sometimes she heard the helicopter landing on the rear pad at dawn. Work, as Mrs. Whitmore called it, in that vague, careful way of hers. But even when she did not see Tristan, Elise knew she was never truly alone. She realized it on the third day, when she was walking through the garden and caught sight of a shadow moving in the distance, following her. A guard, always keeping his distance, but never once letting her leave his field of vision. She was protected 24 hours a day, like a precious jewel in a glass case, or like a prisoner in a beautiful prison. Elise was not sure whether she ought to feel grateful or afraid. Perhaps both. On the seventh night, everything changed. Mrs. Whitmore knocked on her door at 6 o'clock in the evening, carrying a dark blue dress hanging from a wooden hanger. "The master has invited you to dinner," she said simply. 7 o'clock, the private dining room on the third floor. Elise wanted to ask why, but Mrs. Whitmore had already turned away before she could open her mouth. She looked at the dress, a design both simple and elegant, made from the kind of fabric she had never touched in her life, and felt her stomach tighten with anxiety. At precisely 7 o'clock, she stood before the door of the private dining room, her heart beating wildly. The dress fit her as though it had been made for her alone. She did not dare ask how they knew her measurements. She knocked, and Tristan's voice came from inside. "Come in." The private dining room was smaller than she had expected, more intimate than she had imagined. The table was set for two, candles flickered softly, and the tall windows looked out over the garden, sinking into the colors of dusk. Tristan sat at the head of the table, not in his usual suit, but in a white shirt with the collar open and the sleeves rolled to his elbows. He looked different, still frightening, still powerful, but somehow less distant. "Sit down." He motioned toward the chair across from him. Elise sat, trying to keep her hands from trembling. A servant appeared, poured red wine into both of their glasses, then vanished as silently as if he had never been there at all. They ate in silence for a while. Seafood soup, salad, then a main course of steak cooked to absolute perfection. Elise could barely taste any of it. She was too tense to eat. "You wanted to become a doctor," Tristan spoke suddenly, breaking the silence. Elise looked up, startled. It was not a question. It was a statement. He knew. "Yes," she answered, her voice slightly hoarse. "I was in my final year at Columbia before everything happened." "What drew you to medicine?" Tristan tilted his head, his eyes cutting through her. "What made you choose such a difficult path?" Elise set down her fork and looked into her wineglass. The question touched an old wound, a wound that had never truly healed. "My mother," she said softly. "She died of cancer when I was 15. It was terminal. There was nothing left to be done. But the nurses at the hospital, they stayed with her until the very end. They held her hand when she was afraid. They comforted me when I could not stop crying." She lifted her eyes to Tristan. "I wanted to become someone like that. I could not save my mother, but maybe I could save someone else, or at least be there when they needed someone beside them." Tristan was silent. He did not offer one of those empty condolences people used to hand out so easily. There was no look of pity, the kind she despised more than anything. He simply listened, truly listened, as though her story mattered, which was rare in a man with power like his. "Patrick Moran knows about Ricky Doyle." Tristan changed the subject abruptly, his voice lowering. "He is angry, but he has not dared to act yet." "Not yet." Elise felt the blood go cold in her veins. "Are you saying they will retaliate?" "I am saying you need to understand the position you are in." Tristan set down his wineglass and looked directly into her eyes. "You are not invisible anymore, Elise. You have become a piece on the board. And in this world, any piece that does not know its place is the first to be removed." Elise swallowed. "Why are you telling me these things?" "I am only Mine," Tristan cut in. "And I do not keep the people who belong to me in the dark. They need to know what they are facing." The candlelight flickered in his eyes, creating the illusion of warmth. But Elise knew it was only an illusion. This man was dangerous. This man had killed, had ordered others killed, and would go on doing so without blinking an eye. And yet, when she looked into his eyes in that moment, she did not see a monster. She saw a tired man, a lonely man at the peak of power, a man who could command hundreds and yet had no one truly beside him, and that unsettled her in an entirely different way. Not because she was afraid of him, but because she was beginning not to be. The next morning, everything shattered. Elise was standing in the library, rearranging old books on the high shelves, when shouting and the thunder of running footsteps broke out from the main hall. She ran into the corridor, her heart hammering, and saw Conrad rushing toward Tristan's study with a small box in his hand. His face was pale, something she had never seen before on that man of iron. She did not know whether she should follow, but her feet moved on their own. No one stopped her. Perhaps because in the middle of the chaos no one noticed her. Or perhaps because she had become one of Tristan's people and no one dared stand in her way. When she reached the study, the door was still open. She stood at the threshold and saw everything. Conrad placed the box on Tristan's desk. Inside was a photograph. Elise did not need to step closer to recognize the person in it. Her father, Henry Hartwell, lying in a hospital bed, eyes closed, his thin body connected to a web of tubes and monitoring machines. The photograph had been taken from inside the room. Someone had gotten into the secret treatment facility. Someone had stood right beside her father's bed and taken that picture. Along with the photograph was a sheet of paper with a message scrawled across it in red ink. Tristan picked up the note, read it silently, then read it aloud for Conrad. "We know where he is. Return the girl, or he dies slowly." Elise felt her knees give way. She had to grip the doorframe to keep from falling. Her father. They had found her father. The secret treatment facility that only a handful of people knew about. They had found it. Tristan crushed the paper in his hand, the veins standing out sharply across the back of it. His eyes darkened into something deeper, like the sky before a storm, like the sea before a tidal wave crashes ashore. The silence in the room grew so heavy it was hard to breathe. How? Tristan's voice was low and dangerous, like the growl of a beast. How did they know? Conrad shook his head, his face taut with strain. I checked. Only 4 people knew the location of the treatment facility. Me, you, Mrs. Whitmore, and Neil Brennan, the man responsible for transporting Mr. Hartwell there. It cannot be Mrs. Whitmore, Tristan said with absolute certainty. She has been with this family for 30 years. Then, Conrad did not finish the sentence, but both men understood. There was a traitor inside Ashford's ranks. Elise stepped into the room. She no longer had the strength to remain outside the door. My father. Her voice shook. Please, sir. Please save him. I will do anything. I will go back to the Morans, if that is what they want. Just do not let them hurt him. Tristan turned to look at her, and she saw something flash inside those storm-dark eyes. Not anger at her. Anger for her. No one is going back anywhere, he said, his voice sharp as a blade. And your father will be safe. I will move him to another location within the next 24 hours. This time, only Conrad and I will know where he is. He turned to Conrad. Call an emergency meeting. All the lieutenants. The large conference room. 15 minutes. Conrad nodded and left. Tristan looked at Elise. You stay. I need to speak with you after the meeting. The meeting took place under a suffocating strain of tension. Elise stood in the corner of the room, observing as she had done for the past 8 months. But this time, she was not trying to disappear. She was watching with purpose. Tristan sat at the head of the table, Conrad standing on his right. Around them were 6 men, senior lieutenants in the Ashford family. She recognized a few of the faces, and she paid special attention to one of them, Neil Brennan. He was the man responsible for transporting her father. He was one of the 4 people who had known the location of the treatment facility. All through the meeting, Elise watched him. Neil Brennan looked ordinary enough, taking part in the discussion, nodding at the right moments, saying all the proper things. But something was wrong. His eyes, every time someone mentioned the Moran family, he looked away, not with the anger or contempt she saw in the others, but with avoidance, as though he were hiding something. And his left hand kept drifting to his trouser pocket, where the outline of a phone showed faintly beneath the fabric, as though he were waiting for a message, or wanting to send one. The meeting ended, and everyone left. Tristan signaled for Elise to remain. When the room held only the 2 of them, he rose and walked to the window, looking out over the garden below. You were a ghost in this house for 8 months, he said, still with his back turned to her. You saw everything without anyone noticing. You heard everything without anyone knowing you were listening. Elise said nothing. She waited. I need that ability from you. Tristan turned around, his eyes fixed directly on her. There is a traitor in this house. I need you to find him. Elise swallowed. You want me to spy? I want you to do what you do best. Tristan stepped closer to her. Observe. Listen. Remember, you do not need to confront anyone. You only need to keep your eyes open and your ears open. Why do you trust me? Elise asked, her voice trembling slightly. I just got here. I could be a spy for the Morans. You have no reason to trust me. Tristan stopped only a step away from her. He looked down at her, and something softened in those cold eyes. If you were a spy, you would not have cried alone in the kitchen at 3 o'clock in the morning, he said quietly. Spies do not have emotions that real. Spies do not tremble when they speak about their mothers. Spies do not look into my eyes with the kind of real fear you showed me that night. Elise felt her heart tighten inside her chest. He had seen her, not merely looked at her, but truly seen her. I will try, she said, her voice steadier now. I will find the traitor. Tristan nodded. Good. When she left the room, her mind was spinning. Neil Brennan. He was her first suspect, and she would prove it. 2 weeks passed under a low, constant strain of tension. Elise kept watching Neil Brennan, committing every suspicious act of his to memory. The furtive phone calls in deserted hallways, the times he vanished from the estate without anyone knowing where he had gone, the evasive look in his eyes whenever Tristan mentioned the Moran family. She still had no concrete proof, but her instincts screamed that he was the traitor. The fateful night came at 2 o'clock on a Saturday morning. Elise was drifting in uneasy sleep when the alarm siren tore through the darkness. The shrill sound echoed through the estate, mixed with shouting, the pounding of running feet, and the crack of gunfire in the distance. She jerked upright in bed, her heart slamming wildly in her chest. Through the window, she saw flashlight beams sweeping across the eastern garden, dark figures moving through the night, and bursts of fire flashing from gun barrels. The Morans had attacked. Elise did not know what to do. Run? Hide? She rushed to her door, meaning to bolt into the hallway and find someone, anyone. But the door flew open before her hand even touched the knob. A man stood there. Not one of Ashford's guards. He was dressed in black from head to toe, half his face hidden behind a mask, and in his hand was a long-bladed knife glinting beneath the moonlight spilling through the window. Elise opened her mouth to scream, but he lunged at her first, clamping a rough hand over her mouth, a hand that smelled of tobacco and leather. He spun her around, pinned her back against his chest, and pressed the knife to her throat. Cold, sharp, deadly. Be quiet, he hissed into her ear. One sound and I slit your throat. He dragged her into the hallway, the blade still tight against the skin of her neck. Elise could feel the mad hammering of her own heart, could feel the blood pounding through her veins, could feel fear paralyzing every thought in her mind. How had he gotten in? How did he know where her room was? The answer flashed through her head like lightning. The traitor. The traitor had shown him the way. Ashford! The intruder shouted, his voice ringing through the dark corridor. Come out if you want this girl alive. I know you're here. Silence. Then footsteps. Slow, even. From the far end of the hall, a figure emerged. Tristan Ashford stepped out of the shadows wearing a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up. No jacket, no tie. In his hand was a pistol, the barrel aimed straight ahead. His face was calm in a way that was almost terrifying, as though this were nothing more than an ordinary conversation, and not a hostage situation. Let her go. Tristan's voice was low and steady, without the slightest tremor. The intruder laughed, a hoarse, ugly sound that rattled against Elise's ear. Cormac Moran sends his regards, he said, his voice thick with cruel delight. He says the girl belongs to the Morans, not to. He never finished the sentence. The gunshot exploded through the narrow hallway, deafening in the enclosed space. Elise felt the intruder jerk violently backward, his grip loosening, the knife clattering to the floor with a sharp metallic ring. Then he collapsed, dragging her down with him. She rolled away from him in panic and saw blood. Blood pouring from his shoulder, where the bullet had gone through with perfect precision. Not through her, not through any part of him that would kill him instantly, just enough to take him down without killing him. Tristan wanted him alive, for questioning. Footsteps sounded again, and then Tristan was beside her. He dropped to one knee, reached out, lifted her up, and did something she never would have believed him capable of doing. He pulled her into his arms. Tristan Ashford's embrace was strong and certain, wrapping around her completely. She could feel the warmth of his chest, the familiar scent of sandalwood, and the hard pounding of his heartbeat beneath the fabric of his shirt. That heartbeat was not as calm as his face. It was fast, heavy, as if he too had been afraid. afraid for her. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice rougher than usual. His hand rose to examine her throat, where the knife had rested, his fingers brushing lightly over her skin, searching for any cut. "No," Elise whispered, her voice shaking. "I'm all right." Tristan did not let her go. He kept holding her, his chin resting against the top of her head, and whispered into her hair words she would never forget. "Do not ever leave my sight again. Do you understand?" Elise nodded, unable to speak. She only clung to his shirt, trembling in the arms of the most powerful man in New York, and for the first time in her life she felt truly protected. Conrad appeared at the far end of the corridor and gave his report with brutal efficiency. 5 intruders. 4 had been subdued outside. The 5th was the man groaning on the floor. No Ashford casualties. But there was a problem. He knew exactly where Miss Hartwell's room was, Conrad said, his voice tight. He went straight there without hesitation. Someone gave him that information. Tristan rose to his feet, pulling Elise up with him. His eyes turned dark as iron. "Interrogate him. I want to know who pointed him there." "Yes, boss." That night, Elise did not return to her room. She could not. Not only because her room was now part of the crime scene, but because she could not bear the thought of being alone. Tristan brought her to his study. She sat on the leather sofa with a cup of hot tea in her hands that she barely drank, while Tristan remained behind his desk, dealing with the aftermath of the attack. They said nothing. They did not need to, but every so often, Tristan lifted his head and looked at her, as if to make sure she was still there, still safe. And each time their eyes met, Elise felt something shifting. Between them, inside her, she was no longer only someone under his protection. She had become something more. And that frightened her, even as it gave her hope. The next morning, Elise woke on the sofa in Tristan's study. Someone had draped a soft, lightweight blanket over her, and when she opened her eyes, the early sunlight was already pouring through the tall windows. Tristan was no longer in the room, but on his desk lay a small note in his neat handwriting. "The large conference room. 9 o'clock. You need to be there." Elise glanced at the clock. 8:45. She hurried to her feet, smoothed the wrinkled dress she was still wearing from the night before, and tried to tame her tangled hair with her fingers. She looked like a mess, but there was no time to change. By the time she reached the large conference room, everyone was already there. The room was spacious, with a long wooden table that could seat 20 people, and now it was nearly full. Conrad stood at Tristan's right as always. Mrs. Whitmore sat at the end of the table, her back perfectly straight, her face unreadable. The 6 senior lieutenants, including Neil Brennan, sat along both sides, and scattered around the room stood guards and lower-ranking members, more than 10 in all. Every head turned when Elise walked in. She felt as though she were being examined under a microscope. Some of the looks were curious, some surprised, and some were accompanied by murmured words exchanged with the person beside them. Tristan motioned for her to come stand on his left, opposite Conrad. The place of someone trusted, the place of someone important. "I called this meeting for one reason only." Tristan's voice rang out through the silent room. "Last night, the estate was attacked. 5 intruders from the Moran family. 4 were subdued outside. 1 made it inside and attempted to kidnap Miss Hartwell." He paused, sweeping his cold gray gaze across every face in the room. That man knew exactly where her room was. Someone in this house gave him that information. The air in the room turned thick and heavy. Elise saw a few people glance nervously at one another, while others went rigid with tension. Neil Brennan kept his face calm, but she noticed his hand tighten into a fist beneath the table, the knuckles bleaching white. "The traitor will be found," Tristan went on, his voice cold as ice. "And when that happens, he will wish he had never been born. But that is not the main reason I called you all here today." He placed a hand on Elise's shoulder, a possessive gesture no one in the room could possibly miss. "From this moment on, Elise Hartwell is under my direct protection. She is not a servant. She is not a guest. She is mine." Elise felt her heart miss a beat. Mine, not employee, not protected person, but mine. Anyone who harms her, whether by word or by deed, whether intentionally or unintentionally, will answer to me. Tristan continued, his voice dropping into something more dangerous. "Personally, not through Conrad, not through anyone else. I will deal with it myself." A deathly silence settled over the room. Elise looked around, studying the reactions on every face. Conrad gave a slight nod, respect in his eyes when he looked at her. He was not surprised. Perhaps he had known this was coming. Mrs. Whitmore smiled. A small smile, almost too faint to notice, but it was the first smile Elise had ever seen on the stern housekeeper's face. And Neil Brennan? He kept his expression completely blank, but his fist beneath the table tightened harder still, and for the briefest moment, his eyes passed over Elise with something that came close to hostility. Dismissed. Tristan gave the order. Everyone rose and began filing out. As they passed Elise, some lowered their heads in greeting, some nodded with respect, but she also caught other looks. Looks of suspicion, looks of envy, looks that whispered, who is she to receive such favor? She heard the low muttering of two guards as they crossed paths near the door. From scrubbing floors to being under the boss's direct protection. Something about that is not right. Keep your voice down. You want to die? They moved away. But Elise had heard enough. She had known this would happen. She had known Tristan's sudden favor would send ripples through the household. She had gone from being a ghost to becoming a target, not only for the Moran family, but for the jealous eyes within the estate itself. Mrs. Whitmore waited until the room was almost empty before walking over to Elise. She placed a hand on her shoulder, a rare gesture of concern. "Do not pay them any mind, Miss Hartwell," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "They do not understand. They only see a girl suddenly lifted into a higher place. They do not see what the master sees in you." Elise looked at her in surprise. "What does he see in me?" Mrs. Whitmore gave her a mysterious smile. "I have worked for the Ashford family for 30 years. I watched the master grow from a boy into the man he is now. I watched him lose his father, lose his sister, lose everything that ever mattered to him." She paused, her gaze turning distant. "He has never claimed the right to protect anyone like this, Miss Hartwell. Never. You are special to him in a way I have never seen before." She gave Elise's shoulder a gentle squeeze, then turned and walked away, leaving her standing alone in the empty conference room. Elise looked out the window, where the sunlight was falling across the eastern garden. She was special. She was protected. But she was also standing in the most dangerous place imaginable, in the middle of a war she had never wanted to join, with enemies both outside and within, and the only thing keeping her safe was the man she still did not fully understand. A few nights later, a soft knock at the door pulled Elise out of her restless sleep. She looked at the clock on the wall. The hour hand pointed to 1. Who would knock on her door at 1 o'clock in the morning? Her heart began to beat faster as she slipped on a thin robe and walked to the door. When she opened it, the sight of the man standing there made her go still. Tristan Ashford, still dressed in a white shirt with the collar undone, held a bottle of whiskey that was already half empty. He looked different from usual, more tired, and there was something in those eyes that she had never seen before. Loneliness. "I can't sleep," he said, his voice lower than usual. "May I come in?" Elise nodded and stepped aside. She did not know why. She was not surprised. Perhaps because she had begun to understand that Tristan Ashford, beneath all that cold armor, was still only a man. A man carrying a burden that no one else could share. They did not sit inside the room. Tristan walked straight out onto the balcony, where moonlight poured over the eastern garden, turning the white roses to silver. Elise followed him, and they stood there side by side, looking out into the darkness. "Do you know why I trust no one?" Tristan asked suddenly. Elise did not answer. She only waited. "My father was assassinated inside this very house," he said, his voice low and distant, as though he were speaking of an old dream. 8 years ago. The traitor was the man he trusted most, the family's former steward. He had worked for us for 20 years. My father thought of him as a brother." Tristan lifted the bottle and took a long drink. "I was 25. I watched my father die in my arms. His blood covered my hands while I tried to stop the wound, but it was too late. Too late." Elise felt her heart tighten painfully. She wanted to say something, but there were no words large enough to comfort a wound like that. "After that, I swore I would never trust anyone again," Tristan went on, his eyes still fixed on the distance, "and I kept that vow, until recently." He turned to look at her, and Elise felt her breath catch. "But that was not the first time I lost someone I loved." Tristan's voice grew rougher, as though these words were harder to speak than all the rest. "When I was 20, my sister, Amara, she was kidnapped." Elise could not stop the sharp breath that escaped her. She had heard Mrs. Whitmore mentioned that Tristan had lost his sister, but she had never imagined the story was so devastating. They demanded a ransom. My father was preparing to pay it, but I was impatient. I thought I could save her. I led a small group to the place where they were holding Amara. Tristan's hand tightened around the balcony rail until his knuckles turned white. I was wounded. He raised a hand and touched the faint scar running from his temple almost to his left ear, the scar Elise had noticed long ago but had never dared ask about. A bullet grazed me. I was lucky to live. But Amara, his voice broke. They got to her before I arrived. When I found her, she was already cold. Silence fell over the balcony. Elise felt tears sliding down her cheeks before she even realized she was crying for the girl she had never known, crying for the 20-year-old boy who had lost his sister because of his own reckless desperation, crying for the man standing beside her who had carried that pain for 13 years. I failed my father, my sister. Tristan said it almost in a whisper. The people I loved all died because I was not strong enough, because I was not fast enough, because I was not enough. She did not think. She only acted on instinct. Her hand rose and touched the scar at his temple, her fingers brushing lightly over the roughened skin. Tristan went still, as though no one had touched that scar in 13 years. This scar is not proof of failure, Elise said, her voice trembling slightly but steady. It is proof that you tried. You risked your life to save your sister. You fought. You did not give up. She paused, looking straight into those eyes shimmering under the moonlight. That is not failure. That is love. Tristan said nothing. He only looked at her, and then his hand came up and closed around the hand she had laid against his face. He did not pull it away. Instead, he held it there, pressing her palm against his cheek. I am not good with beautiful words, he said, his voice low and rough. I do not know how to comfort anyone or make them feel better. I only know how to fight. I only know how to protect. He stopped, drawing in a deep breath. But there is one thing you need to know. I will not let anyone touch you. Not because you work for me, not because you owe me, but because... He did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. Those eyes, no longer cold now, said everything. Elise stood there beneath the moonlight, hand in hand with the most dangerous man she had ever known, and she realized something that filled her with both fear and wonder. Her heart was falling for him, for a man full of scars, full of danger, and utterly wrong for her, but also the man who would have burned the whole world to protect her. A few days passed after that night on the balcony, and Elise could not stop thinking about Tristan, about the look in his eyes when he spoke of his sister, about the way he had held her hand against his cheek, about the unfinished sentence whose meaning she knew, yet did not dare believe. But she did not forget her task, find the traitor, and her suspicion remained fixed on one man, Neil Brennan. On Wednesday night, Elise could not sleep. She lay awake in bed, tossing and turning, her mind spinning with 1,000 thoughts. At last, she decided to go to the kitchen for a glass of water. The clock read nearly midnight when she stepped into the hallway. The estate was silent as a grave, with only the soft echo of her footsteps on the wooden floor. She passed through the first floor, heading toward the kitchen, when a sound made her stop. Voices, from the communications room at the far end of the corridor. That room should have been empty at this hour. Elise slipped into the shadows, the survival instinct she had honed through 8 months of living like a ghost in this estate returning at once. She moved slowly, soundlessly, toward the half-open door of the communications room. The voice coming from inside grew clearer, and she recognized it immediately. Neil Brennan. Cormac. The plan stays the same. He was on the telephone, his voice low but clear enough for Elise to hear every word. Brooklyn Navy Yard, this Saturday. Ashford will come with 5 men, just as I arranged. Elise felt the blood in her veins turn to ice. Brooklyn Navy Yard. 5 men. He was selling information to the Moran family. He was leading Tristan into a trap. He trusts me, Neil went on, his voice thick with contempt. He has no idea. 8 years working for him, and he still thinks I am loyal. Stupid bastard. There was a stretch of silence, as if the person on the other end was saying something. Then Neil spoke again, and this time his voice was filled with hatred. You ask why I am doing this? Ashford killed my brother 10 years ago, Marcus Brennan. Does that name mean nothing to him? Of course it does not. To him, my brother was just a number. One more traitor that needed to be dealt with. But to me, Marcus was family, the only family I had left. He paused, drawing in a trembling breath of rage. It is time he paid for it. This Saturday, Tristan Ashford will die, and I will be there to watch him fall. Elise did not wait to hear more. She had heard enough. She backed away as slowly and as quietly as she could, then turned and ran. Ran as she had never run in her life. Her heart pounded wildly. Her feet flew over the wooden floor. Her breath came fast and ragged in her chest. She had to get to Tristan's study. She had to tell him. She pounded on the study door, without bothering to knock softly as she always did. A few seconds later, the door opened. Tristan stood there, still dressed in a black suit, as though he too had not slept. His eyes narrowed at the sight of her panic-stricken face. Elise, what is? Neil Brennan. She cut him off, breathless. He is the traitor. I just heard him talking on the phone with Cormac Moran. Tristan went still, but his eyes darkened. Come inside, he said, his voice cold as ice. She stepped in, and he closed the door behind her. Tell me, everything. Elise drew a deep breath, forcing herself to steady. He is arranging to lead you into a trap at Brooklyn Navy Yard this Saturday. You will go with 5 men, and they will be waiting to ambush you. He said you are going to die. She stopped and swallowed. He is doing it because of his brother, Marcus Brennan. He said you killed Marcus 10 years ago. He wants revenge. Tristan said nothing for a long moment. He walked to the window, his back to her, staring out into the darkness beyond. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and dangerous, like thunder before a storm. Marcus Brennan. Yes, I dealt with him 10 years ago. He turned back, his eyes cold as steel. He was selling our information to the FBI. He nearly sent 20 men from this family to prison, including Conrad. He was a traitor, and he was dealt with according to our laws. He paused, and a cold smile touched his mouth. It seems betrayal runs in the Brennan blood. Elise stood there, not knowing what to say. She had just uncovered an assassination plot. She had just saved Tristan's life, and he stood there, terrifyingly calm, as though this were only a small matter to be handled. Neil will be dealt with, Tristan said, his voice leaving no room for mercy. But not yet. If he knows we know, he will run. And I want him to lead me to Cormac Moran. He stepped closer to her, and his face softened. Only slightly, but enough for Elise to see it. You just saved my life, he said, his voice lowering. For the second time. Elise shook her head. I only did what I had to do. No. Tristan lifted a hand and touched her cheek lightly. You did what no one else in this house would have dared do. You faced the truth and ran to tell me, even though Neil could have put you in danger if he had discovered you. He looked into her eyes, and she saw something deep in those eyes. Gratitude, respect, and something else she did not dare name. Thank you, Elise, he whispered, and for the first time, she heard her own name on his lips, not as an order, not as an acknowledgement, but as something tender. Tristan stood there, his hand still resting against her cheek, his eyes searching deep within hers as though he were looking for the answer to a question he had never before dared to ask. Then, without a word of warning, he pulled her into his arms. Tristan Ashford's embrace tightened around her, powerful and desperate at once. She could feel the hard pounding of his heart beneath his shirt, far faster than his usual calm would ever have suggested. The familiar scent of sandalwood mingled with the faint trace of gunpowder, a strange combination that had somehow become the scent she now associated with safety. I do not deserve you, Tristan whispered into her hair, his voice rough and full of pain. My hands are stained with blood, Elise. I have killed men. I have ordered men killed. My life is full of danger, full of enemies, full of darkness. You deserve more than this. Elise drew back just enough to lift her face and look at him. Her green eyes met the gray ones, heavy with everything he had kept buried for so long. I do not need someone perfect, she said, her voice trembling slightly but steady. I do not need some fairy tale prince. I need someone real with me. Someone who sees me. She raised her hand and placed it against his chest, right above the heart beating like madness beneath her palm. You are the only one who has ever truly seen me, Tristan. Not the maid. Not the daughter of a man buried in debt. Not a piece on the board. Me. Just me. Tristan looked at her, and she saw the final wall inside his eyes collapse. He lowered his head slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to, but she did not. His mouth touched hers, gentle at first, as though asking permission, as though asking whether this was allowed. Elise answered him, and the kiss deepened. All the feelings they had held back for so long, the fear, the desperation, the hope, and the love she had never dared admit, all of it broke loose in that single moment. She did not know how long the kiss lasted. It might have been seconds, it might have been minutes, it might have been a lifetime. But when they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard, and the world had changed forever. "I am going to end this," Tristan said, his voice turning hard once more. "Neil Brennan, Patrick Moran, Cormac, all of them. This Saturday, I will end all of it." He stepped away, took out his phone, and placed a call. "Conrad, come to my study, right now, and make sure Neil Brennan does not know." 5 minutes later, Conrad appeared. The iron-hard man did not seem at all surprised to find Elise in the room, as though he had expected this very thing. "We have a traitor," Tristan said shortly. "Neil Brennan. He is working for Cormac Moran. He arranged an ambush at Brooklyn Navy Yard this Saturday." Conrad nodded slowly, not a trace of shock on his weathered face. "I have suspected him for a long time, but I had no proof. Now we do." Tristan glanced at Elise, pride shining in his eyes. Miss Hartwell provided the proof. "What is your plan, boss?" "We are going to Brooklyn Navy Yard exactly as Neil arranged," Tristan said with a smile so cold it seemed to freeze the air. "But we will arrive earlier. 30 gunmen, positioned at every strategic point. When Patrick Moran and his men appear, they will be the ones walking into a trap, not us." Conrad nodded, his eyes lighting with the sharp calculation of an old warrior. "I will mobilize the men immediately. No one will know, except those I trust absolutely." "Good." Tristan turned to Elise. "And you will stay in the safe room until I return." She wanted to protest, wanted to say she could help, but the look in Tristan's eyes left no room for argument. This was not a request. It was an order. And she understood why. He could not fight if he had to worry about her safety. He needed to know she was safe so he could focus on staying alive. Tristan led her down to the basement, through hallways she had never once set foot in during the 8 months she had worked there. At last, they stopped before a thick steel door secured with a biometric lock. He placed his hand on the scanner, and the door opened with a soft hiss. Inside was an armored room, fully stocked, with a bed, food, water, and a bank of security monitors showing every corner of the estate. "You stay here until I come back," Tristan said, turning to face her. "Do not come out for any reason. Promise me." Elise caught hold of his hand and held it tightly. "Come back," she said, her voice trembling. "Come back to me." Tristan lifted a hand, tipped her chin up, and bent to kiss her once more. This kiss was different from the first. There was no hesitation in it now, no asking permission. This was a promise, a vow, everything he could not put into words. "I will come back," he whispered when they parted. "Because now I have a reason to come back." Then he stepped outside, and the steel door closed behind him, with a heavy click. Elise stood there alone in the armored room, staring at the security monitor that showed Tristan walking down the hallway. She placed a hand over her chest, where her heart was pounding wildly, and she prayed. Prayed for the man she loved. Prayed that he would come back. Prayed that this would not be the last time she ever saw him. On Saturday night, the Brooklyn sky looked as though it had been torn apart by the fiercest storm of the season. Rain came down in sheets, thunder roared through the darkness, and the wind lashed at everything with savage force. It was a perfect night for bloodshed. 3 black Mercedes-Benz G-Wagons rolled out through the gates of the Ashford estate, gliding through the downpour like phantoms. Their headlights cut through the dark, casting blurred streaks of light across the drenched road. Inside the first vehicle, 3 men sat in silence. Tristan Ashford occupied the back seat, his gaze fixed on the rain-streaked window, his face as expressionless as a carved statue. Conrad sat beside him, spine straight, one hand resting easily on his thigh, yet ready to seize the MP5 hidden beneath the seat in an instant. And Neil Brennan? He sat in the front passenger seat beside the driver, struggling to suppress the smile tugging at his mouth. Inside his mind, thoughts spun with dark exhilaration. At last, the day had come. 5 years. 5 years he had waited. 5 years he had pretended loyalty, pretended obedience, pretended to bow his head before the man who had killed his brother. Marcus Brennan had not deserved to die. In Neil's eyes, his brother had been a hero, a man who had tried to escape the spiral of crime by cooperating with the FBI. But Tristan Ashford had called it betrayal and dealt with Marcus like a mangy dog, and now it was Ashford's turn to die. Neil glanced into the rearview mirror and saw Tristan still staring out the window with that dead, empty look. Fool, he thought. He is walking straight into the trap and he does not even know it. Brooklyn Navy Yard. 30 of Cormac Moran's gunmen were already waiting. Once Tristan stepped inside that warehouse, he would never walk back out again. Brother, I will avenge you, Neil whispered inside his own head. Tonight, the enemy's blood will spill. What he did not know was that, in the darkness of the vehicle, Tristan Ashford was watching him through the mirror as well. His eyes were cold as ice, reading every movement, every flicker of expression on the traitor's face. Beneath his black suit, Tristan carried a loaded pistol. Conrad did too. Both men knew exactly what would happen when they reached Brooklyn Navy Yard, but it was nothing like what Neil imagined. Dozens of miles away, inside the armored room beneath the basement of the Ashford estate, Elise sat curled up on the bed, her eyes fixed on the security monitor before her. The safe room was built like a fortress, yet she had never felt more hollow or more alone. The screens showed every corner of the estate, all of it eerily silent. Empty hallways, darkened rooms. Tristan and most of his men were gone, leaving behind a place that had once been full of life and motion, and now felt like nothing but an abandoned shell. She looked at the clock. 11:15. They had been gone for nearly an hour. By now, perhaps they were almost at Brooklyn Navy Yard. By now, perhaps Tristan was already walking into danger. Elise wrapped her arms tighter around her knees, trying to contain the fear crushing her heart. She remembered his kiss, remembered his promise, remembered the way he had looked at her as though she were the most precious thing on earth. "Come back to me, Tristan," she whispered into the darkness. "Please come back to me." What she did not know was that Tristan's plan was unfolding perfectly. That afternoon, before the sun had gone down, 30 of the Ashford family's most elite gunmen had moved into Brooklyn Navy Yard in secret. They traveled in ordinary delivery trucks, dressed as laborers, blending into the crowds like men who belonged there. No one noticed. No one suspected. And when night fell, they were already in position, on the rooftops surrounding the abandoned warehouse where the meeting would take place. Inside, the rusted shipping containers scattered across the grounds. Behind the crumbling walls of old buildings, 30 gunmen, armed with sniper rifles and automatic weapons, waiting in silence. They were the darkness itself, waiting to swallow the enemy whole. Patrick Moran believed he was setting a trap for Tristan Ashford. In truth, he was walking straight into death without ever realizing it. Tristan was not the man stepping into a trap. Tristan was the man who had built it. The convoy stopped in front of the abandoned warehouse at Brooklyn Navy Yard. Rain still poured from the sky like a waterfall. Thunder still rolled overhead. The wind still battered everything with mad, relentless force. Neil Brennan opened the car door, stepped out into the storm, and could no longer hide the smile on his lips. This was his hour of glory. Tristan and Conrad stepped out after him, their faces unreadable, moving through the rain as though they were merely taking a walk in a park. The warehouse in front of them was old and rusted, its giant iron doors hanging partially open. A dim light spilled out from inside, and Tristan knew Patrick Moran and his men were waiting within. They believed they were the hunters. They had no idea they were the prey. Tristan walked toward the doors, and in his mind there was only one thought. Elise. He would return to her, no matter the cost. The rusted iron door groaned on its hinges as Tristan pushed it open. Inside the warehouse, sickly yellow light spilled over a vast space thick with darkness and the smell of damp decay. And there, at the center of it all, standing like a king upon his throne, was Patrick Moran. The head of the Moran family was now past 50, his silver hair combed neatly back, his face weathered with the roughness of a man who had spent his whole life in violence. Beside him stood Cormac, his son and heir, a younger man with wild eyes and a cruel smile. Around them, 30 Moran gunmen formed a circle, their weapons loaded, their barrels aimed directly at the 3 men who had just entered. Tristan, Conrad, and Neil. 3 men walking into the tiger's den. Patrick Moran laughed, and the sound echoed through the empty space of the warehouse. "Tristan Ashford," he said, his voice thick with savage pleasure. "So the day has finally come. Did you really think you were clever? Did you think you could pay off that petty little debt and imagine I would forget? Did you think you could kill Ricky Doyle and not pay for it?" Patrick took one step forward, the smile widening across his face. "But there was one thing you did not expect, was there? One of your own has already betrayed you." He gave a nod toward Neil Brennan, his eyes gleaming with approval. "Well done, Brennan. 5 years of patience, 5 years of waiting. Your brother would be proud." Neil stepped away from where he had stood beside Tristan, his face lit with dark satisfaction. He pulled the pistol hidden beneath his suit jacket and aimed it straight at the back of Tristan's head, his hand trembling with exultation. "This is for Marcus," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You killed my brother. You treated his life as if it were dirt. Now I will." He never finished the sentence. In a movement so fast the human eye could scarcely follow it, Conrad spun around, his arm lashing out against Neil's wrist with terrifying force. The pistol flew from Neil's hand and skidded across the concrete floor. Then Conrad drove his foot into the back of Neil's knee, forcing him down, and followed with a brutal punch to the face that sent him crashing flat onto the ground. It all happened in less than 2 seconds. Neil lay sprawled on the warehouse floor, blood streaming from his nose, his eyes wide with shock and horror. "How?" he stammered, staring up at Tristan in utter disbelief. "How did you know?" Patrick Moran had frozen as well, the smile erased from his face. And Tristan Ashford, for the first time that night, smiled. It was the first smile Patrick had ever seen on his enemy's face, and it was cold to the bone, cold as death. "Did you really think I did not know, Patrick?" Tristan said, his voice low and dangerous like the growl of thunder. "I have known for quite some time. I let Neil move freely so I could see what you intended to do, so he could lead me to you, and you did not disappoint me." Tristan raised his hand and snapped his fingers. The sound was small, yet it cracked through the warehouse like a gunshot. And then, everything changed. The lights in the warehouse blazed on, flooding every corner with harsh illumination. At the very same instant, from the rooftops, from the shattered windows, from the rusted containers surrounding the grounds, 30 dark figures appeared. Ashford gunmen, dressed in black from head to toe, armed with sniper rifles and automatic weapons. And on the chest of every Moran gunman, a red dot appeared. Laser sights from the scopes, fixed directly over their hearts. 30 red dots, 30 death sentences waiting to be carried out. Patrick Moran looked around him, his face drained pale as ash. Cormac's was the same, his mad smile gone, replaced by the primal fear of an animal driven into a corner. "No," Patrick stammered. "No, it cannot. This was my trap. This was my plan. No, Patrick." Tristan stepped forward, each footfall echoing through the deathly silence. "This is my trap, and you just walked straight into it." He stopped directly in front of Patrick, his eyes cold as winter ice as they locked onto the Moran boss's face. "You made a mistake when you laid a hand on what is mine," Tristan said, each word falling with the weight of a hammer. "You sent Ricky Doyle to beat an innocent girl. You threatened to kill her father. You tried to kidnap her inside my own home." He tilted his head, the cold smile still resting on his mouth. "You made a mistake when you thought you could buy loyalty inside my house. Neil Brennan is a puppet, and I let him dance until I was ready to cut the strings." Tristan moved even closer, now only a single step away from Patrick. "And you made a mistake when you underestimated me. Did you really think I would walk into a trap like a lamb? Have you forgotten who I am?" Patrick Moran stood there with his hands hanging uselessly at his sides, his eyes darting around in search of an escape that did not exist. His men stood frozen, not daring to move while the 30 red dots remained fixed on their chests. Cormac trembled beside his father, his face gone green with fear. They had fallen into the trap, and there was no way out. The deathly silence inside the warehouse was shattered by a single gunshot. One of the Moran gunmen, either too panicked or too reckless, tried to fire at Tristan. He went down before his finger could finish pulling the trigger, a sniper's bullet from the rooftop tearing straight through his shoulder. And then hell broke loose. Gunfire thundered across Brooklyn Navy Yard, mingling with the roar of the storm still raging outside. The Moran gunmen tried to fight back, but they never stood a chance. Surrounded on every side, with 30 Ashford marksmen positioned higher and better protected, they were like fish in a barrel waiting to be shot. Tristan and Conrad moved like two shadows, swift and lethal. They took cover behind old shipping crates, firing with perfect precision, bringing down every man who tried to resist. Tristan felt a bullet graze his left arm, ripping through the fabric of his suit jacket and leaving a streak of red blood behind. But he did not stop. Pain was only part of the work. The firefight was brief, but savage. In less than 5 minutes, most of the Moran gunmen were either down or on their knees, with their hands raised. They were many, but they had been overpowered from every direction. They had guns, but they had no strategy, no discipline, and no preparation for what had met them here. Cormac Moran, seeing that the game was lost, tried to run through the rear door of the warehouse. He bolted into the darkness, his feet slipping on the wet concrete, hoping the sheets of rain would hide him. But Conrad was already there. The iron-hard man emerged from the shadows like a ghost and cut off Cormac's path. Cormac swung a desperate fist, but Conrad slipped easily aside and drove a punch into his stomach that folded him in half. Then came a kick to the face, and Cormac crashed to the floor unconscious. Conrad dragged him back into the warehouse like a sack of garbage. By the time the gun smoke began to settle, the warehouse looked like a battlefield. Bodies and wounded men lay scattered across the concrete floor. Those who had surrendered were kneeling with their hands locked behind their heads, trembling beneath the guns of Ashford's men. And in the middle of it all, Patrick Moran was on his knees, his hands cuffed behind his back, his own gun now aimed at his head by one of Tristan's men. Tristan stepped in front of the Moran boss and looked down at the man who had once been the terror of the East Coast. Now Patrick was nothing more than a trembling old man with fear in his eyes. "Ashford," Patrick stammered, trying to gather the last broken pieces of his dignity. "We can negotiate. Money, territory, anything you want. I will pull out of New York. I will never touch anything that belongs to you again. Just spare my life and my son's." Tristan looked at him with gray eyes that held not a trace of mercy. "You sent men to beat her," he said, his voice cold as ice. "An innocent girl who had never harmed anyone, and you sent some bastard to punch her in the face in the middle of a rainstorm." Tristan took a step closer, crowding Patrick beneath the force of his presence. "You threatened to kill her father, a sick, weak man, and you used him like a piece on the board to threaten his daughter. Another step. You tried to kidnap her inside my own house. You sent a man into her bedroom, put a knife to her throat, and thought you could do that without paying the price." Tristan bent down until his face was only inches from Patrick's. "There is no negotiation for crimes like those, Patrick. No amount of money, no stretch of territory can buy my forgiveness." He straightened and gestured to his men. "Take him away. Hand him over to the system." Patrick was dragged off, still babbling pleas for mercy. But no one listened. The system Tristan referred to was made up of law enforcement officials. The Ashford family had bought long ago. Patrick Moran would not die that night. He would live, but he would spend the rest of his life in a federal prison, under charges heavy enough to keep him behind bars until death claimed him. Sometimes death is a release. Living in misery is the true punishment. That left Neil Brennan. He was dragged before Tristan, his face bruised and swollen from Conrad's punch. The smug triumph he had worn only minutes earlier was gone. Now he was nothing more than a traitor caught in the act, trembling in fear. "I gave you everything, Neil," Tristan said, his voice thick with contempt. "A high place in this family, more money than you could spend in one lifetime, the respect of every man here, and you chose betrayal." Neil spat onto the floor, blood mixed in the saliva. "You killed Marcus," he screamed, his voice shaking with hatred. "My brother did not deserve to die." "You killed him like a dog!" Tristan looked at him without the slightest flicker of feeling. "Marcus sold our information to the FBI. He nearly sent 20 members of this family to prison, including Conrad, who had once thought of him as a brother. He deserved to die according to our laws." Tristan tilted his head, his gaze cold as winter steel. "And now, so do you." Tristan gave a signal, and Neil was dragged away, still screaming curses as he went. His fate was never spoken aloud, but the look in Conrad's eyes as he watched him go said everything. Traitors to the Ashford family never met a good end. By the time it was over, the rain had begun to ease. The last drops fell from a sky that was slowly starting to clear, and the thunder had retreated into the distance. Tristan stood in the middle of the warehouse, looking over the battlefield. And for the first time that night, he allowed himself to feel the pain in his wounded arm. Conrad came to stand beside him, concern flickering in his eyes when he saw the blood soaking through his employer's jacket. "You need that wound dressed, boss." Tristan shook his head. "It is only a scratch. It does not matter." He turned to look at Conrad, and for the first time all night, his face softened. "Take me home, Conrad. Home to her. Dawn broke over Long Island Sound, the first rays of sunlight piercing through the gray clouds that were slowly dissolving after the storm of the night before. The sky shifted from black to gray, then to the palest pink, as though nature itself were celebrating the end of a long and blood-soaked night. In the safe room beneath the basement, Elise had not slept for a single second all night. She sat curled up on the bed, her eyes fixed on the security monitor, her heart beating in heavy, aching rhythms inside her chest. Every passing minute felt like an hour. Every small sound made her jump. She had prayed, she had cried, she had whispered his name into the darkness 100 times. And then she heard it. The sound of engines, faint at first, then closer, closer still. Cars approaching the estate. Elise sprang to her feet as though released from a spring, her heart leaping into her throat. She ran to the door of the safe room, but the steel door did not open. She beat her hands against it in panic until she remembered that it could only be opened from the outside or when the system was disengaged. The next few seconds stretched into an eternity. Then the steel door hissed open. A guard stood outside, his face weary but smiling. "The boss is back, Miss Hartwell. He wants you in the main hall." Elise did not need to hear another word. She ran past the guard, ran up the stairs, ran through the long corridors, ran as though her whole life depended on reaching the main hall, and perhaps it truly did. When she burst into the main hall, the sight before her brought her to a stop. The great doors stood open, morning sunlight pouring through them, and there in the doorway, surrounded by golden light like a halo, stood Tristan Ashford. He looked terrible. His suit jacket was torn and smeared with mud. The white shirt beneath it was stained with blood. His left arm was wrapped in a rough makeshift bandage, and blood was still seeping through. His face was exhausted, streaked with dirt and sweat, but he was standing. He was alive, and when his eyes found her, a smile touched his mouth, melting away every shard of his usual ice. "Elise," he whispered her name like a prayer that had finally been answered. She did not remember running. She only knew that in the next instant she was in his arms, holding him as tightly as if she feared he would disappear the moment she let go. Tristan held her with his uninjured arm, his other arm hanging uselessly at his side because of the pain. He buried his face in her hair, breathing in her scent, and for the first time after that long blood-drenched night, he allowed himself to exhale in relief. "It is over," he whispered against her ear. "Patrick Moran will never touch you again. Cormac, Neil, all of them. It is over. No one will ever hurt you again," Elise cried. Tears ran down her cheeks and soaked into his stained shirt, but these were not tears of fear. They were not the tears of despair she had shed the night she broke down in the kitchen. These were tears of relief, tears of happiness, tears from someone who had waited far too long to feel safe. "I thought," she sobbed, her voice trembling, "I thought you would not come back. I thought I would lose you." Tristan drew back only enough to lift a hand and cradle her face. His fingers gently brushed the tears from her cheeks, and his eyes were no longer cold now, but warm as the dawn light pouring through the windows. "I made you a promise," he said, his voice low and tender, "and I keep my promises. For you. Always for you." Then he bent his head and kissed her. A kiss in the main hall of the Ashford estate, beneath the light of dawn, in front of Conrad, Mrs. Whitmore, and the entire team of guards who had just returned from battle. But no one said a word. Conrad merely smiled, a rare smile on his iron-hard face, then quietly signaled for the others to leave. Mrs. Whitmore dabbed at a tear in the corner of her eye, then turned away as well, drawing the curious servants with her. One by one, they departed from the main hall, leaving Tristan and Elise alone in each other's arms. The kiss went on, sweet and full of promise. When at last they parted, Elise looked up into the face of the man who had changed her life, the most feared mafia boss in New York, a man with blood on his hands, a man who had killed and would kill again, but also the man who had burned the world to protect her, the man who had seen her when no one else did, the man who had loved her when she believed she was unworthy of love. "You are hurt," she whispered, her eyes dropping to the bandaged arm. "It is only a scratch," he answered, the smile still lingering on his lips. "It does not hurt half as much as the thought of losing you." Elise felt her heart melt inside her. She laid her head against his chest and listened to the steady beat of his heart beneath the stained shirt. For the first time in 2 years, she felt truly safe, not because she was protected by strong walls or armed guards, not because her enemies had been destroyed, but because she was loved. Truly, completely, and unconditionally loved. A month passed, and the Ashford estate was no longer the place Elise had once known. Not because the walls or the furnishings had changed, but because her place within this house had become something entirely different. She was no longer the maid who scrubbed floors and washed bed linens. She was no longer the ghost trying to make herself invisible. She was Tristan Ashford's partner, the woman loved and protected by the most powerful mafia boss in New York. Every morning, she woke in the room that had now become theirs. Every night, she fell asleep in the arms of the man she had once feared. Life had changed in ways she had never dared to dream possible. One afternoon, Elise sat in the library with a laptop open before her, the screen filled with the familiar face of her father on a video call. Henry Hartwell had grown much thinner since the last time she had seen him, but his eyes were brighter now, clearer. At the secret treatment facility in northern New York, he was receiving the best medical care and was on the long road away from alcohol and gambling. "My daughter," Henry said, his voice trembling with emotion. "I am sorry. I pushed you into hell because of my own weakness. I gambled, I drank, and I made you leave school to pay my debts. I do not deserve a daughter like you." Elise smiled, her own eyes shining with tears. "Father, I found heaven in that hell. I found love. I found the meaning of my life. You do not need to apologize. You only need to get well. That is the only thing I need." After the call ended, Elise sat there for a long while, looking out the window. She had forgiven her father, not because he deserved it, but because she no longer wanted to carry hatred in her heart. She had a new life now, and she wanted to begin it with a clean heart. Tristan entered the library carrying a stack of papers. He had changed over the past month, not in who he was, but in the direction he was choosing. The Ashford empire was slowly being made legitimate. He was buying up real estate companies, investing in hospitals and schools, washing blood-stained money into lawful enterprises. "I cannot erase the past," he said when Elise asked about those changes. "I have done things I cannot undo, but I can build a different future. For you, for us. A future in which our children will never need to be ashamed of who their father was." Elise had plans of her own as well. She had decided to return to school and finish the medical degree she had abandoned 2 years earlier. When she told Tristan, he did not merely support her. He contacted Columbia University himself to make certain she could continue exactly where she had left off. "You deserve to chase your dream," he told her, "and I will make sure no one ever stands in your way again." That night, Tristan led Elise out into the Eastern Garden. This was where they had spoken for the first time, where he had told her about his father and his sister, where he had almost confessed what she meant to him. Moonlight poured over the white roses in bloom, turning the garden into something like a fairy kingdom. Tristan stopped beside the fountain and turned to face her. His gray eyes, eyes that had once been cold as ice, were warm now like firelight. "I have something for you," he said, slipping a hand into the pocket of his suit jacket. Elise waited, her heart beating faster when she saw him draw out a small black velvet box. Tristan did not go down on one knee. He simply stood there, tall and commanding, the box in his hand. "Not my style," he said when he saw the look in her eyes. "Kneeling. I kneel for no one." Then he opened the box, revealing a diamond ring blazing beneath the moon. But he did not look at the ring. He looked straight into her eyes and took her hand in his other hand. "Elise, I cannot promise you an ordinary life," he said, his voice low and utterly sincere. "I cannot promise there will be no danger. My world was not built for the weak, and though I am trying to change it, there will still be nights when I do not come home, times when you will worry, enemies who will look at you and see a target." He paused and tightened his hold on her hand. "But I can promise you one thing. I will love you, protect you, and place you above everything else until my final breath. I will burn the whole world if I must, to keep you safe, and I will spend every day of the rest of my life trying to become worthy of you." He looked into her eyes, and in those eyes she saw everything he could not put fully into words: love, devotion, and a promise more sacred than any vow. "Elise Hartwell, will you stay beside me?" Tears slipped down her cheeks, but her lips broke into the brightest smile she had ever worn. "Yes," she whispered, then said it again more strongly. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." Tristan smiled. That rare smile she knew belonged only to her. He took the ring from the box and gently slid it onto her finger. The diamond glittered beneath the moonlight, but it was not as radiant as the look in her eyes when she lifted them to him. He did not place the ring there because she needed it. He placed it there because he wanted the whole world to know whose she was. And she wore it because she wanted the whole world to know whom she had chosen. 3 months after the night at Brooklyn Navy Yard, the Ashford estate shone more brilliantly than ever before. Hundreds of candles burned throughout the great hall, and the crystal light reflected in sparkling brilliance, like stars fallen across the ceiling. Classical music drifted from the live orchestra in the corner of the room, blending with the sounds of laughter, conversation, and the clink of glasses from hundreds of guests. This was the grandest gathering the Ashford family had hosted in many years. Every senior member of the family was present, along with business associates, influential politicians, and some of the most powerful faces in New York. But none of them drew the eye the way the woman standing beside Tristan Ashford did. Elise wore a deep blue evening gown, the color of the darkest ocean, fitted close to her body and falling into a soft flare at the hem. Her hair was swept up, revealing the graceful line of her neck, where a glittering emerald necklace rested, an early wedding gift from Tristan. The engagement ring on her finger caught the light every time she moved, like a quiet declaration to the entire world. She was no longer the thin girl with frightened eyes, crying alone in a dark kitchen at 3 o'clock in the morning. She shone, confident, strong, and when she moved through the crowd, people stepped aside and bowed their heads to her as they would to the mistress of this estate, because that was exactly what she had become. Conrad stood in the corner of the room, watching everything with his usual sharp eyes, but on his iron-hard face was a small smile, the kind of smile he reserved only for those he truly respected. Beside him, a young guard newly brought into service looked at Elise with open curiosity. "Who is she that the boss treasures her so much?" he asked Conrad. "I have never seen him look at anyone like that." Conrad did not turn his head. His eyes remained fixed on Elise as she laughed softly with an important guest. Tristan standing beside her with one hand resting lightly against the small of her back. "She used to be a maid," Conrad said, and there was deep respect in his voice. "She scrubbed floors, washed bed linens, and spent 8 months trying to make herself invisible. None of us noticed her. None of us thought she mattered." He paused, and the smile on his mouth deepened just a little. "Now she is the queen of this empire, and she deserves every single second of it. Mrs. Whitmore stood not far away, her gaze on Elise filled with the pride of a mother watching her daughter shine. She had seen the girl from the very first day she stepped into the estate, trembling and afraid. She had watched her grow stronger, rise into herself, and finally claim the place that had become her own. The celebration continued, but at some point in the night, Tristan took Elise by the hand and led her out to the western balcony, away from the noise of the crowd. The cool night air wrapped around them, and the distant lights of Manhattan glittered like a carpet of stars stretching to the horizon. Long Island Sound lay peaceful beneath the moonlight, the waves whispering softly against the shore like a lullaby. "Do you still think of yourself as the girl crying in that kitchen that night?" Tristan asked, his voice gentle and warm. Elise looked out over the water and remembered that fateful night, the night she had thought her life was over, the night the door had shut with that terrifying click, and she had been forced to face the most frightening man she had ever known. "That girl is gone," she said, her voice steady and at peace. "The woman standing here is the woman I wanted to become, the woman beside you, the woman you chose, the woman who will love you no matter how brutal this world becomes." Tristan stepped behind her, his arms circling her waist, his chin resting lightly against the top of her head. They stood there, 2 figures blended into one, gazing out at the city sleeping in the distance. "You are the only thing in my life I never calculated, never planned for," he whispered into her hair. "I spent my whole life controlling everything, making sure I was never caught off guard, always staying one step ahead of my enemies. But you are the most beautiful surprise I have ever known, and I would not trade you for anything in this world." Elise turned within his arms and placed her hand against his chest, directly over the steady beat of his heart. "Me too," she whispered. "Me too." That kitchen door, all those months ago, had shut with a terrible click. Elise had thought it was the sound of fate sealing her into hell, the end of her ordinary life, the beginning of dark days with no escape. But she had been wrong. It was the sound of a door opening onto a new life, a new love, a new version of herself. That door had led her to the most dangerous man she had ever known, the man with blood on his hands and a heart that knew only how to love her. That door had transformed her from an invisible servant into the queen of an empire, and she would not trade it for anything in this world. The story of Elise and Tristan reminds us that sometimes the darkest moments in our lives become the beginning of the most beautiful things. That love can take root in places no one would ever expect. That people can change, can grow stronger, can find light even in the deepest darkness. If this story has touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel and press like to support us. Do not forget to share this video with your friends and loved ones so they too can listen to moving stories like this every day. We would truly love to know how this story made you feel. Have you ever lived through a moment that seemed hopeless, only to discover later that it became a beautiful turning point in your life? Which part of the story moved you the most? Please share what is in the deepest part of your heart in the comments below. We will read every line and deeply treasure every thought you share. We wish everyone watching this video good health, a joyful life, and peace every single day. Thank you for staying with us. Goodbye, and we will see you again in the next video.